things as well. I would like to thank you all for joining us as we talk about anaerobic digestion. In this stream today, we're aiming for a more interactive discussion, so if anyone wants to move a little bit further forward, please do. Oh, Taz. Thank you, Taz. That's one. But I'm sure you can all hear me from everywhere. So we have 3 speakers today, and I'll get to introducing them in a moment. Can I just make sure that everyone's got their phone off after the break or on silent? Thank you. I'd also like to welcome the people online who are listening in today, and please send your questions through. So we're going to try and keep it to about 15 minutes per speaker to start off with, and then holding all the questions to a sort of panel style question and answer phase, hopefully going for half an hour to 3/4 an hour after we speak. Please hold your questions to then, and Frank will actually be facilitating that discussion and looking at the online questions. So those of you online listening in, please text through your questions as well, because we will definitely look for them and look to answer them. Okay. Look, I've been coming to Coffs Harbour conferences for many, many years now, since about 2001, I think it is. Although I've nearly forgotten. And in that time, I think I have seen many presentations from lovely European ladies and gentlemen coming over telling us about the wonders of anaerobic digestion and how good it would be if Australia took up this technology like it was taken up in the UK and Europe. Unfortunately, they didn't really have much of an insight into any of the commercial, regulatory or other aspects relating to the specific challenges we have in Australia. So while they did wonderful presentations about technologies that looked very interesting, there didn't seem to be much prospect of it being adopted. But here we are now in 2025, and we are starting to see a much broader adoption of anaerobic digestion and many plans in the pipeline to include anaerobic digestion as part of organic recycling facilities that process source-separated organics from municipal sources, not just biosolids at sewage treatment plants and at food processing facilities. So there's a lot of potential, and it is coming, and we're here to talk about how to make it happen better and hopefully quicker. So let's start with Frank's presentation. Frank's now joined SLR as a technical director. And Frank, I'll leave you to get into it and tell a bit more about yourself.
Thanks. Yes, thank you very much. As Angus already said, my name is Frank Klosterman. I'm with SLR. SLR is a UK-based consultancy, but they have around 1,000 people in Australia, which a lot of people don't know. In the planning work, we can do basically everything from A to Z. We've got, I think, all of the specialty consultancy in-house, but we do lots of other work as well. A quick overview over my agenda is, hold on, which button do I press? I should have asked that question beforehand.
That's the question. There we go. Point at the screen or this screen? The back.
To the back? And what? Oh, the right button. Hello. Anyway, I can tell you what's on the agenda. We don't need the slide, really. It's only 4 subjects. I'll give you some commercial aspects of anaerobic digestion, some high-level CapEx and OpEx numbers, just to whet the appetite or get you groaning, and then some practical aspects of AD and some of the reasons why AD hasn't worked in Australia. So if you go to the next slide, then I'll have to tell you a little story about this, because you think, what's this all about, right? I was a pretty young guy running or in charge of a company in Australia called Remondis, and I was extremely keen of growing the business. Didn't have much experience in the industry yet, and I found this nice anaerobic digestion technology in Ballarat. They were digesting piggery waste, and I was really impressed and thought we can do something with it. I invited the guys, made a bit fuss about them, invited them to a meeting in Sydney, and I had the CEO of the Remondis group, which is now called Remondis, then it was called Rethman, attend the meeting. So big fuss, big meeting. They introduced what they're doing. I explained what I was going to do with this technology in Australia, etc., etc., etc. The CEO, Dr. Niels, sat there, arms like that, and he said, "Not interested." That was probably one of my most embarrassing moments in my professional life. Everyone just, the faces dropped, people went home, and then Dr. Niels sat me down and said, "Mr. Klosterman, I have to do this." And he drew me this little pictogram. Right? He said, "I'm not interested in technology." Right? He drew a box. He said, "Technology, black box, not interested. What I'm interested in is, you tell me what waste you've got. How much? What's the quality? What's the seasonal fluctuation? How does it behave? What's the contamination? You need to know everything about your waste." Number one. Number two, what are the dollars? Can you charge for it? Is it a cost? What is the opportunity cost? What does the competition do? You need to know the dollars. Number two. Number three, what comes out the other end? Is there a market for it? Does it have a value? Or is it another cost? Because if you do your accounting, if you can turn a cost into a revenue, you've got a double whammy. But if you've got a cost and it's subject to levies and all these sort of things, you have to put that cost into your gate fee, right? So you need to know your output. You need to know the dollars for that output. So once you've got these two, right, the inputs and the outputs will create a little desire or a wish list. This is what I'd like to do. The dollars will tell you what you can afford. And then he said, we go shopping. Right? There's everything in this, anything, you want to do anything with waste, you can do anything. It's a question of waste and dollars. And this leads me to another little thing, which is a little bit of a bugbear of mine. I've been in Australia now for 30 years. And I think for the last 20 years, or the first 20 years of those 30, when we went to conferences like this, people talked about technology. What is your technology? Mine is better than yours. Yours can't do this. So I got grey hair of this because of this stuff, because we had the wrong conversation for 20 years. And each and every time I was trying to talk to people about the dollars. No, we need to know the technology. Is it emerging? Is it fantastic? Can it do this? Wrong conversation, people. I'm really sorry to tell you. But anyway, that was just a little story. And you can easily relate to that if you talk about organics, right? If you've got sloshy food waste, you don't compost it, because there's no air can flow through this stuff. If you've got sloshy food waste, you need a bulking agent. If you don't have a bulking agent, you can't do composting, okay? It's pretty simple, really. If you don't have a market for your product at the end, don't worry about processing it. Yeah, it's not worth anything. Take it to landfill. If the regulations work against you, can I have the next slide? So the same box, but slightly different story. In anaerobic digestion in Australia, it's all about the outputs. We know what the inputs are. There's plenty of food waste around. There's FOGA around the corner, and you can anaerobically digest all of this stuff. The problem is, what do you do with the stuff coming out the other end? We know a little bit about biogas, because why? It's pretty much the same as landfill gas. But Digestate. The EPA in New South Wales is on a funny planet because they say, we really want you to process organic waste. And yes, we certainly support anaerobic digestion. Fantastic. Have they got a regulation for digestate? No. So what do? You don't invest. It's very simple. It's really, really simple. The environment industry, our industry here, lives and dies by regulation. If you wouldn't have a landfill levy, there would be 2 people in this room, landfillers, right? And they would be interested in AD, in landfill gas. So all of us here live and die by regulation. And I think the government isn't really deeply aware of that really simple message. But if you've got the wrong regulation or no regulation, it's a risk, right? So if I look at, and we look where Angus will talk about the regulations a little bit later on. If I look at New South Wales, to me at the moment, when it comes to anaerobic digestion, it goes into the basket case. Because if you want to do anaerobic digestion in New South Wales, you have no regulation for the digestate, so you have to then treat it as a compost. That is an additional cost, and in most cases, I'd say it kills the business case. It would be quite different if you had a regulation that allowed, after certain treatments, to take it out to land. Digestate can have fertilizer values, and suddenly the whole story changes because now you've got a value. Now you can talk. Now you can create a business case. Anyway, so sorry, sorry to say that, but we need working, realistic, commercially viable regulation. Without that, it ain't going to happen. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So SLI has done a couple of AD projects around the world, and here are some very high-level numbers. And keep in mind, they're high level, and a lot of these numbers depends on the detail, it depends on the location, it depends on your development approval, it depends on your licensing conditions, and of course, a lot of it depends on the use of your biogas and the pathway for digestate. We talk about biogas use in a minute, and we talked about digestate beforehand. But if you look at these numbers, they give you just a high-level idea. We're talking, if you talk high-tech anaerobic digestion, European style, designed for being operated within the vicinity of urban development, you are talking pretty much the same investment as you need for an enclosed composting facility, maybe a bit more. The difference between dry and wet is not that big. The difference between biogas to CHP, which is combined heat and power, to biogas to biomethane is between $4 and $5 million. That is the capture of the CO2, the filling station for the gas, and when you then talk grid injection, it costs even more, right? Which in Australia is, I think, not viable. But biogas is widely used in Europe for a very good reason. We talk about that in a minute. So have a look at these numbers. Of course, as with anything else, the higher the volumes, the lesser, the smaller the investment, relatively speaking. The OPEX numbers here are just sort of naked OPEX numbers, so they don't include the CapEx and the interest. And that's a lot of money. So if you look at 32.5 million, you write that off over 10 years, you write these investments off over the term of the contract you've got, right? If the facility will last you 25 or 30 years, but I've been in the position where I held the purse strings. I would not give you any money if you say, I've got a contract for 10 years and I want to write it off over 20 years. Not done. Nobody does that. The bank won't give you money. So another little piece of commercial reality is the viability of your investment does depend very much on the longevity and quality of your contracts. And that can make a very big difference. In this case, just 32 million, divided by 10 is 3.2 million per annum. Divided by 50,000 is what, $60 or so, right? $60 on top of the 78, and then plus interest. If you divide it, if you could write this over 15 or 20 years, boom, your gate fee goes down significantly. So that needs to be understood as well. Thank you. The next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can do it myself now, I hope. So some other commercial aspects. I think we still don't value biogas or biomethane really in Australia. Little example. The typical biogas content of food organics is around the 150 normal cubic meters per ton. That has been proven many times over. Bill can confirm that for some work he's done himself. And that is biogas, so that's not methane. Biogas is a mixture of CO2 and CH4. The garden organics, that is the leafy matter, wood doesn't digest, so that has around 90 cubic meters per ton in biogas yield. The methane content typically fluctuates between 50 to 60%. If you assume 10,000 tons of FOGO with only 10% of food organics and 85% of garden organics, I've just assumed there's 5% contamination in there, just for the sake of the numbers, you get around 915,000 normal cubic meters of biogas. That has an energy content of $235,000 at a wholesale price of $46 per megawatt hour. So that's $46 was the average price of wholesale into the grid in New South Wales in the last quarter of last calendar year. That's 4.6 cents a kilowatt hour. If you use that energy to replace energy used by yourself that you buy at a retail level, whole different story. Because you're not paying 4.6 cents, you probably pay 25 cents per kilowatt hour. That makes a very, very big difference, right? That amount of biogas has a biomethane content of around 500,000 normal cubic meters. If you use that as compressed natural gas, which is possible, at a diesel price of $1.80, the value of that same biogas is suddenly $934,000. So the delta between those two, the wholesale price and the biomethane use, is nearly $700,000 per annum. Now, that's a bit of an extreme example because the prices fluctuate all the time. We know that, but I made that example on purpose to show you how much money you can throw away, if you like. So another thing I'd like to say in this context is, I showed you these high-level capex numbers, but that is if you have to go for high-quality, highly engineered technology, and there are very few AD facilities in Australia that do that at the moment. What we do have in Australia is really low-tech, it's very simple AD technology, but that's in the ag sector. In the agricultural sector, people are much more switched on, and they have what we call covered lagoons, right? Every large piggery has one of them, the large abattoirs have them, and they operate at capex numbers that's probably 10% of what I showed you, and they still work. Right? So there's a massive difference there. If you have the space and the buffer zones, you can go low-tech, and suddenly it makes a massive difference because your $65 or $60 in capex goes down to maybe $6. Right? Huh? Yeah. Was it 15 minutes? Oh, right. Well, I then don't talk about that. This just shows how I did my calculation. Just some practical aspects, and I'll be a bit quicker now. I think the message I like to get across is don't overthink the technology bit. Get your waste, your product, and your dollars right. Get your inputs and outputs sorted. Get your supply contracts sorted. Understand whether you need a resource recovery audit and exemption, because you will, and how to get it. And it won't be easy, so you're in there for the long haul. Building and commissioning, if you import technology, get the original equipment manufacturer to install and commission. Trying to do it yourself is suicidal or costs you a lot of money. What could we do to encourage some more AD? So AD has thrived elsewhere, and I'll go a bit quicker. I'll just give you this little example. When we talk about biomethane and replacing the price of diesel, and you're saying, oh, how does that work? Well, the city of Berlin has been doing this since 2002, right? They take their FOGO to an AD plant. They strip the CO2 out of the biogas. They compress the biomethane, and they fill it in their trucks. And they now have a fleet of, I'm not sure, 140 of those trucks running around Berlin, running on waste. Collecting the waste. So since this has been going on for around 20 years, so it's not a big deal. So why has AD thrived elsewhere? Well, as I said before, regulation helps, politics help. In Germany, for example, they had a feed-in tariff for biogas or biomethane. So you knew what you were getting for your product. AD in Europe is largely agriculturally based, right? Because the agricultural sector has a lot of organic waste, and digesting it makes perfect sense to them because they can use the biogas on their farm to cut down their own cost, the operating costs. Germany has around 10,000 AD plants. So I don't want to hear from anybody anything about technology problems, right? If you can't get it going, you wouldn't have 10,000 plants of them around. The gross electricity production in Germany by those plants was around 33 terawatt hours per annum. So 52,000 jobs in the bioenergy sector. Points that should convince a politician to do something for it. And that's how I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. Great start. So if we can pop over to the next set of slides. It's my turn. Great. And that's the right button. Always press the right button. Okay, so a few key messages just to kick off. Planning and regulatory compliance for anaerobic digestion is not easy. But with determination and good advice, it is, I think, achievable in New South Wales and Australia more broadly. But it is extremely important to get the expectations of decision makers right up front. And, the good news is with high regulatory barriers, those remain barriers for entry for everybody else. So if you can get through it, your competition has a fair wall to get over to be competitive with you. So I thought it was best if we really frame the discussion, because we want to open this out to you guys a bit later. So what are we talking about? Frank jumped straight into it, but really here we're talking about centralised facilities where waste is collected from waste generators and delivered to a separate processing facility. So this is not sort of on-site stuff. It's a little bit easier to achieve from a regulatory point of view. And we are talking fairly large-scale facilities in the context of Australia anyway. So, we're talking about a minimum economic scale for a centralised facility of about 20,000 tonnes per year. And it's even a bit hard at that scale. Good economic scale is about 50,000 tonnes per year. And it's going to be rare that you get enough waste together to do a 100,000 tonne plus facility in Australia. And I say that because, a medium-sized regional local government area, population, say 35,000 people, may be able to aggregate 15,000 tonnes. So you would need, you know, 3 or 4 of them working together, or a bigger LGA, to get yourself up to the 50,000 tonne sort of number. So that first facility was a wet AD facility on the left there, one operating in Austria. This is a dry AD facility, and it looks a lot like a tunnel composting facility. And I'll let Bill talk some more detail about different types of fermentation technologies. But broadly speaking, wet fermentation, plug flow, and dry fermentation are the categories. There are many other parts other than just anaerobic digestion to an AD facility. You're going to need gas storage, either with steel or membrane covers. You're going to definitely need, likely need a CHP, a combined heat and power engine. Alternatively, you can upgrade the gas to a fuel to make biomethane. You can dry and pelletize the digestate like the Earth Power facility does in Sydney. And you can, if you're very clever, use the heat for adjacent industrial uses. Now, I think Frank touched on this, that the regulators have shown a bit of a preference for going to digestate going to composting to ensure pasteurisation and stabilisation, but some AD processes can also pasteurize. And it really does add to the cost if you have to run a whole separate composting process next to an AD facility. But it's the way the regulations are set up at the moment, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, digestate going to composting is easier to get over the line. Okay, so again, we're sort of framing the discussion here. What are we talking about in terms of waste inputs? Okay, because what regulations apply to the construction and operation of these facilities depends, in part, on the types of wastes that need to be processed. So we're talking about source-separated waste. They're almost always going to need some form of decontamination, as Earth Power found out the hard way. The types of materials we're talking is commercial food waste. FOGO can definitely go into these types of facilities, particularly if they're dry anaerobic fermentation, but usually not garden organics or wood waste. Those are sources of carbon to do co-composting with the digestate after the AD process. Other sorts of inputs we commonly see as being interesting for AD is grease trap waste, septic pump outs, and dissolved air flotation sludges. It's really an open question about whether we should consider adding in biosolids. Depends on the source of those biosolids. There's definitely a lot of regulatory risk around biosolids in the coming years, application to land. I mean, basically an AD process doesn't help any more than a composting process in removing the risks associated with things like biosolids. These other inputs like manure and paunch, as Frank said, in Europe, that's agricultural inputs are common, but here, can you actually fund the facility with gate fees from those sorts of materials? Not really. So you've got to have all the other regulatory frameworks lining up and policy encouragements lining up to make that sort of input happen. And food processing waste, almost certainly, but you've got to really make sure you characterise it. Okay, I'll keep running through this as fast as possible. So another really important aspect is facility location. Again, the regulations that apply really depend on this. It's critical to optimise this location or siting a facility correctly is critical to achieve the optimum economic, environmental and social outcomes, and just making sure that it can actually be approved. So suitable locations. Yeah, thanks. Button's not always working for me. Suitable locations include, very commonly they're at sewage treatment plants at the moment. They could be next to existing landfills, next to an existing composting facility so that you can compost the digestate coming out of the facility. Great if you can get it near an industrial user of gas, electricity or heat. It's got to be suitably zoned. Commonly, it's a special purpose zone, particularly if it's associated with an STP or a landfill. You need to have some separation, I would say. I mean, it depends on the jurisdiction as to what the actual guidance is, but I would say at least 250 metre separation. I mean, it is usually a fully enclosed facility, but if you're co-composting, you might want to do that outdoors adjacent to the facility, or at least have a maturation area. And also you've got to receive this waste too, so you'll have to have some sort of receival hall and biofilter arrangement. Really good access to roads, suitable for large vehicles, trucks, and cleared land is preferred, particularly to avoid problems around complying with various biodiversity regulations. Okay. Okay, the other aspect is outputs and their uses. So the various products coming out of a AD plant, digestate, it's pretty wet and unstable. As we talked about before, you can have a pelletized or granulated organic fertilizer that makes it a lot more transportable. You can have composted digestate, biogas or biogas upgraded to biomethane. Electricity for use on site. One of the best usage cases for AD, I think, is to actually provide the energy for a waste management facility to operate itself. Particularly large in-vessel composting facilities can require a lot of electrical power. Heat for drying or industrial uses. The drying helps in the pelletizing process. And carbon dioxide as well, interestingly. If you separate the carbon dioxide from the methane, you can actually have a use for the carbon dioxide too. So that's a wide range of uses there, and pictured there is actually a biomethane upgraded little fuel station from that same plant in Austria. So, overview of planning and regulation. This is a very top-level overview, okay? And I've made it fairly focused on the New South Wales context. So, starting at the bottom level, local level, you're going to have to... It's not actually moving, yes. Yeah, lift it up higher. So, meeting all the local LEP and DCP requirements, obviously. It'll be a type of energy recovery facility, not just a waste management facility, so you've got extra hurdles to jump over there. In New South Wales, that'll make it a designated and integrated development, particularly at the scales I've talked about. It's generally approved at a regional or perhaps state level. Very comprehensive EIA required. Extensive consultation is really important. The community doesn't generally know what anaerobic digestion is. They got a decent idea with composting, but not so much with anaerobic digestion. And the EPA will be involved in both the consent and issuing the license. And be aware that the biogas, is an eligible waste fuel under the Energy from Waste policy in New South Wales, and you're going to need a specific resource recovery order and exemption to burn that stuff in your CHP, even though you're burning it on the same site you're producing it, which is really interesting. Found that out the hard way. So, planning pitfalls. Got to start really early. At least 2 years. At least 2 years. Absolute minimum. Really longer. It can take 5 years quite easily to get one of these facilities up, in New South Wales at least. And in fact, we're in a bit of a moving feast there. In that sort of time frame, the regulations and the guidelines can actually change while you're planning it. So work really hard on consultation, explain the project to all stakeholders, including all of the government authorities who don't necessarily know what it is either. Your air quality impact assessment, make sure you include your CHP emissions, and also work out the greenhouse gas benefits. That's one of the biggest positives of an anaerobic digestion process. Clearly present how the biogas storage and combustion hazards are being managed. Okay, surprisingly large worries around that. So you'll end up having a comprehensive fire safety and bushfire impact assessment, particularly if you're close to bushland. And I would say fully enclosed facilities are the way to go. Okay, again, I'm going to focus a bit on the New South Wales situation here. The New South Wales Resource Recovery Framework is what applies to the application of the outputs to land and the biogas. In Queensland, there's arguably a better framework that at least contemplates an end of waste, the end of waste framework, which publishes codes and approvals, a bit like our specific or general and specific resource recovery orders and exemptions in New South Wales. If you want to ask more questions about that, there's quite a bit of detail, so we can get into it afterwards. Okay, so look, one of the biggest problems we have in terms of the regulatory risk is the anaerobic digestion facilities usually require these specific orders and exemptions, but they won't be issued until after the facility is built. So basically, as an investor, you have to go in trusting that you're actually going to be able to take this output to somewhere other than a landfill, which is a bit of a big commercial risk. It is possible to submit an application to the New South Wales EPA before construction and get feedback, and you should seek a technology with a great track record of processing the same, ideally, but probably just similar inputs overseas. And you've got to characterise those inputs and test the outputs, possibly at a pilot facility elsewhere in Australia or overseas, or do it bench scale, which I've previously done over here with Bill before. Okay, so look, I've got one more slide, but in the interest of time, I've got 2 more minutes? Oh, you're keeping time for me, Frank, thanks. Okay, so there's a bunch of new guidance and regulation going on updates to regulation going on in New South Wales, or at least consultation on it. So there's new guidance on the resource recovery framework. To be honest, it doesn't really change much. It just doubles down on it and explains it in a lot more detail. There is this thing called the resource recovery innovation pathway that looks a bit exciting, but it's still a concept at the moment. Looks good. But yeah, the jury's still out on whether it will actually be implemented the way it looks like at the moment. The New South Wales Energy from Waste framework is also under review, but biogas is effectively proposed to remain an eligible waste fuel, so that doesn't really change things. And the old 4 locations identified for energy from waste, well, AD doesn't have to fall in those locations, it can be anywhere, so it's not limited by that. Also, there is still a review of the biosolids guidelines going on. When that will end, I don't know. They're apparently still doing a lot of direct consultation with stakeholders, and we still await whether that will actually massively change what can be done with biosolids. And biosolids are often going into AD facilities too, so that will be a big change to the framework. So there's a lot of regulatory risk in terms of change as well. That's the message. But it can be navigated, and a conservative path can be taken to start with. So, I'm conscious that I've thrown up a lot of seeming barriers, but I think that there is a pathway to get through it and still develop AD projects with the right expectations set at the beginning. Okay, so now I'm going to invite Bill to come up, and he's going to get into some of the technical detail about various anaerobic digestion technologies. Yeah?
Hi everyone, Bill Clark from the University of Queensland. I've been at the university now for 30 years, working in the bioprocessing area, concentrating on anaerobic processes. So I have got out of the lab, and we've had opportunities over the years to to implement anaerobic digestion at more than the lab scale, and you know, we're competing against the experts overseas, so we're finding niches where we can apply anaerobic digestion. So I'll go through some of these examples in the context of the rollout of FOGO around Australia. So and what I'm going to talk about, I guess the two extremes of anaerobic digestion, the very wet processes to the very dry processes. So so perhaps oh, I was just looking for the laser pointer.
It's too high tech.
Here we go. So if we've just got a separate food waste collection, I think there is an opportunity there for wet continuous digestion. The challenge with wet digestion is that the material is very readily solubilized, and like a wastewater treatment plant, we've got to try and retain the microorganisms to digest the waste. So a very simple process, but separate residence times for the solids and the liquids. If we go the other extreme and we're collecting the green waste separately, well, as Angus said, that's probably headed for composting in windrows. If we've got mixed food waste and garden waste, well, anaerobic digestion has a place there, and that could, well, there are famous processes for doing that, dry processes like the Drainco, Vlorga processes, or the batch processes, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So, so in Australia, aside from abattoirs and wastewater treatment plants, we have very few examples of anaerobic digesters being applied to organic solid waste, and there's the Earth Power facility, the facility in Perth at Jandakot, Yarra Valley Water have got a wet process for essentially food process. So all these are wet type processes. So at the moment, we don't have a dry anaerobic digestion process in Australia. Without dwelling on this too much, anaerobic digestion, regardless of whether we're talking wet or dry processes, the stages are, well, first of all, microorganisms don't have teeth, so the organic solids have to be solubilized, and certainly if you're talking about green waste, this is the rate limiting step. And in fact, if you like, the more solid the material is, the more lignocellulosic sort of materials, they're very easy to operate, because as soon as material is solubilized, it's going to be converted to methane. There's in terms of the stability of the anaerobic digesters for more solid sort of material, very simple. It's a bit more challenging if you've got readily soluble sugary sort of wastes. Of course, they can become acidic and the system can sour, so they require a bit more control. So once you've hydrolyzed and solubilized the organic material, and you've converted it to monomers or short-chained molecules, then they need to be fermented to either acetic acid or volatile fatty acids, alcohol, and then those compounds, there are a group of organisms that can get energy from those short-chain compounds and produce acetic acid and hydrogen, which of course is the substrate for methanogens. So typically with solid waste, we have all the microbial life on the particles. So this is a micrograph, fluorescent microscopy of a cellulose particle. All the microorganisms are on the surface of the particle. This is why in anaerobic digestion you don't have to vigorously stir the process. In fact, if you vigorously stir, it's probably adverse to the process. The biofilms, there is some delicacy with the biofilm, so it's sufficient just to, if you like, somehow inoculate, either by mixing initially with established particles that are already degrading with fresh particles, or you can run liquid from an established part of a methanogenic fraction of your process to the fresh waste. And once it's colonised, it doesn't matter how much you mix. The rate that material is going to digest is simply the rate of growth of the microorganisms on that surface. And so if we look at the picture of an organic particle, it needs to be colonised initially by the organisms that can hydrolyse, and they're only doing that because they're going to eat the products, so they don't do it just for altruistic reasons. They need to eat themselves. And then as that biofilm establishes, all of the other organisms that are further on down the chain, including the methanogens, sit on the surface in a extracellular polymeric matrix under the microscope. So you're just facilitating that process, and anaerobic digestion, even though the microbiology of the process is you could say is complex, that all these organisms are ubiquitous, and I'll just demonstrate that by the fact that we've started anaerobic digestion processes on a number of occasions without any inoculum. Okay. Dry. Well, even a wet process. I'll give an example of that. So again, just looking at the two extremes, I've made one mistake here. This should be less than 10% dry matter. If we're talking about a wet process, you need to be able to move the material around. So wet processes are always continuous. You never have batch wet processes. So you're pumping in the waste, and the digestion is very quick. It's not controlled by hydrolysis. So the main challenge with wet processes is retaining the biomass, because if the hydraulic residence time is only a week or something, and the solids also have the same residence time, you're going to wash out your microorganisms unless you retain them. And you can think of, so golden circle, fruit cannery, other plants have this sort of process where they had a fermentation acidification tank initially. So what fresh material comes in here, and then the liquor goes through an upflow anaerobic sludge blanket reactor. So the methanogens are in granules here, and they're retained. And so this process can run at a very short residence time. Then if we talk about dry processes, which we don't have in Australia, this is an example of the Drainco process, where we have fresh waste coming in here, and it's mixed with digestate. So that's how they inoculate the new material coming in, and then that mixture is pumped to the top of the digester, and that might have a residence time of 3 to 4 weeks. But then we have the batch processes, and so you've just got a mature batch in a shed, in a container, and you might run liquor from that container to the fresh batch, or you might actually run some of the solids from the old batch and mix it with the fresh waste to start the digestion. And so here's some examples that we've done, and as I say, as academics, we compete on a global scale in publishing, and so we tend to try and find niches where we can in Australia, where we can implement this sort of work. And probably the initial experiment we did was a few years ago now. This is 2008, this publication, and this is Bush Holdings banana packaging shed in Tully, and they, if you've watched the War on Waste, they've talked about bananas there. They waste so many bananas, well, certainly back in these days, they wasted 60% of the crop or something because the bananas were fine, but they were the wrong shape. So they would, so we were feeding bananas to a hopper. I can't quite, here's a hopper here. The bananas, here's the digester here. And so they just pumped liquor from this digester and flushed the rejected bananas into this huge bag, basically. And this is, the bananas are 90% water, and of the actual solid content in banana, about 90% of it is biodegradable. So we were getting over 300 cubic metres of methane per dry kilogram of banana. And we published this work. You can see here, so this reactor was just fed with bananas and sodium bicarbonate as a buffer. No inoculum. We didn't want to bring in sewage sludge into a food processing facility, so we had no inoculum at all. And you can see here the digester working quite happily there with biogas being produced. So that's an example of, and this was a fed batch digester. So by that I mean that bananas were just put in, because they were so completely digestible, there's not much solid residue left. So we could just keep on feeding bananas in. Eventually, the digester had to be desludged, but after a few years. That's one application. Another application was on the UQ campus. We implemented a anaerobic digestion plant to treat black water being toilet water, basically from the mechanical engineering building in the middle of the engineering precinct. I'll just show a couple of pictures there. But the objective of this anaerobic digester was to produce non-potable Class A water, which we irrigated right there around the plant, in the middle of the engineering precinct. So this system was fed with 300 litres per day of black water, 15 kilograms of food waste. So black water by itself, of course, is full of nutrient. Most of the nitrogen we excrete is in urine, as well as the phosphorus. And black water by itself does not have enough carbon to remove the nutrient in black water. You need to supplement with an external source of carbon. And normal sewage is fine because our kitchens are connected to the sewage system. So wastewater treatment plants generally have enough, although they do have to add some external source of carbon in biological nutrient removal plants. But here we were using food waste, hence the digester. So the digester here, the digester is highlighted here in purple. This is a fermentation, so it's a two-stage wet process. Here's a fermentation, and here's a methanogenic tank. This is the receival tank. And then downstream here, we had the membrane bioreactor to actually do the alternate aerobic, anaerobic steps to remove the nitrogen and phosphorus. But the carbon source came from the fermenter, and the black line, the red line there is feeding from the fermenter into the membrane bioreactor. And then the rest of the carbon that we had, so we were feeding food waste in excess actually, we were producing methane. And to show that, here's the plant there, and you can see it's half a shipping container right next to the mechanical engineering building. I'm taking a photo from the civil engineering building. The head of school's office is right above this plant. So if it wasn't working, if there was odour. There we go. I'm watching. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Here's the plant here, and the wastewater was pumped directly from the building. We didn't have to handle any black water. Pumped into the container. We had to manually feed the food waste, and we were producing about 4 cubic metres of biogas per day through a flare up the top there, and then we were producing the non-potable Class A water, and we're irrigating that where thousands of students move. And this plant worked perfectly fine for 18 months. No problem at all. Here's a picture of 4 minutes. Okay. A younger me standing in front of the plant, and I can see the slide here. It's not coming up. Oh, there we go. So there's the first stage. We had heat exchangers, so we ran the fermentation tank was thermophilic, 55 degrees. The methanogenic tank was 38. The effluent tank, where we stored some of the effluent before pumping out into the garden, the membrane bioreactor. Just give you a different view here. The little tray there's where we fed the food waste, solid organic waste influent. Once we fed it into the macerator, pumped it into the first stage. So this is, yeah, I mean, this plant is a bit more elaborate because it was running as a continuous process. Okay, so now dry batch digestion. We've done a lot of work on dry batch digestion. This diagram was from a paper many years ago, which shows the inoculation process that we use, which is quite a simple process. We just have a fresh batch of waste here, and we just take liquor from a stabilised methanogenic batch of waste, and we feed it to the fresh batch. And that displaces a lot of acids, volatile fatty acids, from the fresh batch, which we feed back to the stabilised batch, which produces methane. And eventually, after this initial nursing stage, if you like, can then operate separately and finish the digestion process. And of course, these processes are established around the world. As you know, California are now stopping organic waste going to landfill, and there's a proliferation of these sorts of plants around the place, and 3 of them look very similar. Materials loaded into tunnels and then digested. So, but we've had the opportunity to try this ourselves, thanks to Frank here, when Frank was working with T Services and initiated this process. So we've been out sampling municipal solid waste. Over the years, we've done a lot of work on municipal solid waste, so unsorted municipal solid waste. We do a lot of lab work, and these are our tools of our trade, these 200-litre reactors. You need a fairly large reactor to get a representative fraction of solid waste. So we can run trials at various configurations here. But the one trial I want to speak about are the biocells that we ran, so with the biocells we had, so instead of tunnels we had big bags, and each bag contained 1,000 tonnes of waste sitting on a gravel bed. And we actually, in this operation, we flooded and drained these bags. So we were feeding leachate from the bottom until the waste was completely submerged, and then we would drain. We would drain the cell and feed it back to this big reservoir here. We need to have enough leachate here to completely flood the bed, and so if this was fresh waste, we had volatile fatty acid concentrations in the liquor here of 80 grams per litre, not milligrams, 80 grams per litre. And then we would feed that liquor, that rich liquor, back to the other bed, which was, after we initially started, would be methanogenic. And that bed could quite happily handle that concentration of volatile fatty acids. So similarly, we would flood this bed and then pump that back to the reservoir, and we'd go through this alternate process. We'd flood and drain this bed, then flood and drain that bed. So this is how we inoculated fresh beds. Some pictures of the construction of the biocells. This is the you can see the suction lines here, the feed lines at the far end of the cell there. This is Frank standing looking at his baby, and here is the feeding of the cell. So we shredded the waste and then fed the sub 80 ml fraction into the cell, and that was spread around. 1,000 tonnes of it. This is a picture of the material. It looks very organic, but you can obviously see there's a lot of material in. And this was, of course, all built when Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister, and we had the carbon pollution reduction scheme, so there was a big incentive there to reduce the emissions from landfill. Here's the completed biocells. So we've got the two cells here. Up here is the leachate reservoir. So, we pump up to the leachate reservoir, then pump into the cells. Here's a picture of so all the biogas ran through an Indris-Hauser flow meter, which also detected the concentration of methane. So we placed a lot of emphasis on getting good data from these experiments. Another shot. Okay. Now, I won't dwell on this too long, but down the bottom of the plot here, you can see these white circles. So this was an initial biocell that we ran in a trickle flow mode. And you can see the rate of biogas production here. I've got two plots here, the hourly production, which are the circles, and then the cumulative production of gas. So this was in a leach bed scale. And you can imagine if you're running a leach bed at such a large scale, it is difficult to actually get uniform flow through all the particles. There could be preferential flow. But under the flood and drain, when you flood it, everything gets contacted. And you can see here, this is a performance of our initial cell, and you can see that it was quite slow initially because, again, we didn't inoculate. No sludge, no nothing. It was just the waste itself that where gradually the microbial population built up, and we get this very sharp increase in methane production because there was a huge build-up of volatile fatty acids, and once the methanogens established, there was a big spike in biogas production. And then the second cell started immediately because we had this established inventory of methanogenic organisms, and we got basically the maximum biogas rate well, close to the maximum biogas rate from the very start of the operation of this biocell. So the operation here was about 3 months to completely digest the waste here. And to give you an idea of the yields, the leach bed operation produced, well, I've got two figures here, one per tonne as received tonne, then one biogas yield per tonne of volatile solids. So 120 odd per kilogram volatile solids, or 44 cubic metres per tonne. This is the leach bed, 166 days, and this was only 54% of the BMP yield. So we sampled material quite extensively and measured how much methane we could get under absolute ideal lab conditions. Then in the flood and drain cell, you can see the biogas production is almost twice as much. So over 200 cubic metres of methane per tonne of volatile solids. Absolutely competitive with in-vessel commercial processes. The residence time, however, is lengthy, 104 days, but I think that would continue to come down with successive generations of biocells. The extent of degradation, 95% of the BMP yield. So there, just some examples of application of anaerobic digestion in Australia. Okay, and that's my last slide. Right.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. Questions and answers. Maybe I just do a little amendment to what Bill just said. So the biocell process that Bill described there is entirely feasible with FOGO. The organic fraction of that MSW was 85% organics, 15% other crap, plastics and stuff. But as you heard, no inoculation. Basically put it into bladder. The cells were designed like a landfill cell, but a mini landfill cell, right? 1,000 tonne per cell. You can make it probably smaller. You can make it probably bigger. That just was a reasonable size. And the advantage of it, because it's just a bladder, you can put it on top of an old landfill. So you know, if you've got a landfill sitting around, there's your space. The other thing I wanted to amend is, when you look at the biochemistry of anaerobic digestion, you've got these 4 different stages. It all looks a bit complicated, or complex, not complicated. But in reality, you're not doing anything. The bugs do it for you, right? All you need to do is make the bugs happy. So you give them the atmosphere, the surroundings they like, which is moisture and temperature. And there's a little bit of process knowledge in there, but in principle, this works by itself, literally. So let's not talk about technology, let's talk about other things. So where are your questions? Yes.
We're doing repeating the question, Frank.
Okay, very good. Bill, your first slide had the flow diagram. You had FOGO going to composting, you had food going to AD. The middle bit, the hybrid bit, you had someone pulling out a bag and sending it over there. I want to ask you about a different hybrid, which is trommeling FOGO to just take grass and food, leaving the lignocellulosics over there for the heavy woody waste over there for composting. Have you done any work around food and grass? Because that's the small fraction in a FOGO bin. And can we AD that? And what is that like? And is the grass helpful or a hindrance to FOGO composting?
Okay.
Sorry, to the AD process.
Yeah, okay. So the question is, can we take FOGO, separate by trommeling or otherwise the digestible material, the small scale grass and other fractions out, and can we then aerobically adjust that? And question to Bill, the answer is yes, but please.
Yeah.
Efficiency.
Okay.
I know you can do it.
Yep.
I want to know, is it a help or a hindrance?
No, that would definitely be a help. You're talking about no shredding?
Oh, shred the food waste, yeah, but put it through a trommel as
but not the green ones.
Less than 100
Yeah,
mil.
that's exactly the process we did up there in the biocell. That's exactly the process.
Yours was MSW.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, if you shredded green waste, for example, and took the small fraction out, that would also be helpful because, you know, the coarser lignocellulosic particles would help with, you know, permeation of water, and it would be good for the compost as well. So in terms of the digestibility, grass is very digestible. So any soft green waste is very digestible. As digestible as you know, some of the fibrous content in celery or, you know, fruit peel or
If you don't mind me add, think cow, right? Their stomachs are anaerobic digesters, multi-stage, and they live from grass. So there's your answer. Yep.
I get that it's digestible,
Yep.
but grass is not a great additive in terms of biogas generation. And so you've got to build bigger vessels and have more capacity when you're adding grass in. Is there a gain in terms of, you know, does the grass help, or does it just make the whole process bigger, more costly, and doesn't generate the gas to go with it?
So I think your question would be, what's the biomethane potential of grass? Yeah.
Off the top of my head, Dave Chenoweth, the late Dave Chenoweth, who got us going, did a lot of work on yard waste, what he called yard waste. And I remember grass was like 160 odd cubic metres methane per kilogram, dry kilogram. So it's not as good as some of the food waste, but it's will certainly enhance your biomethane production per cubic metre of reactor. It might bring it down a little bit. So I guess it, you know, that it would be a fine economic argument as to whether it's advantageous or not. Yeah.
But when you put grass into compost on the other hand, grass is what, more than 90% water, so it just disappears anyway. It evaporates. Yeah. Yep.
Steve from Hornsby Council. I'm going to summarise what I've heard, which is the regulatory framework isn't fully established.
Yep.
Introduces commercial risk.
Yes.
Overlay that with the fact that there's very limited AD in the country and no dry AD.
Yep.
We're New South Wales based. We've got a mandate to turn on photo systems by 2030. I'd be interested in the panel's view whether AD is ever going to be a serious player in this space when we put that together.
Okay, the question is will AD ever be a serious player in the regulatory context in New South Wales? Because
And the timeframes.
in the timeframes given by the government, 2030, and the fact that the regulatory uncertainty creates commercial risk. What do you think?
So while we haven't had it, there is microphone. I've lost the mic. Hello, AD people.
So Angus says, yeah, come over here.
And I'll just add to that, you know, we'll all be wanting to, I won't run my own, I'll be wanting to enter into a contract. I'll need to sign up for a significant period. Will the game be moved on by the time everyone's signed up for contracts? We can talk theoretically, but then, you know, we're all signed up to other techs or solutions.
So really, it is, in summary, it is possible to get it up. It just takes time. You've got to give it sufficient lead time if you want it. And
But we've all got 2030 as our lead time.
yes,
Something on the ground.
sure. Yeah, but I mean, there's a whole series of, it might not be in Sydney, but there are a whole series of facilities now coming to the end of their first terms of contracts, like Port Macquarie Hastings, for instance, where potentially they're going to need to expand and they might add in an AD component to that type of facility. And some of the established players in Sydney might eventually decide to do the same thing as well, once they fill up their first easy capacity with, you know, and they've got a secure supply. I mean, remember that 2030 is about a mandate to provide collection services. We might not see alignment. In fact, I think a lot of us expect not to see alignment of infrastructure availability exactly with the timing of all the collections being implemented. Okay, it might actually take time for that to all to line up. But once there is that known supply sitting there and contracts get renewed over years, I see there being more potential. But you know, as you say, everything's got to go really quickly now to 2030 if we're actually going to not landfill a bunch of source separated FOGO.
If I may add to that, Steve. So Angus said that there's already an approved facility. It's in Byron Bay. It hasn't been built yet.
We got
For all
it back.
sorts of reason. I would say, I would go back to what I did at the very beginning, right? You need to get your business case right, and you need to talk to the EPA, basically ASAP, and say, this is what we want to do. This is what we need from you to get this, right? And if your business case then, says, it makes sense and you stick to it, then although I always sound doom and gloom when I talk about the EPA, you may end up. Yep.
I'm not building my own. So
Yeah. Well, if you, okay. Well, that's a good point. If you're just a customer, then it looks like doom and gloom. Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Looks like I'm going to be the walking stick.
Thank you. Mike Ritchie, MRA. I better declare who I am.
You don't need to do that.
It'll probably go to composting whole scale for at least the 7-year contract that you're doing. In the meantime, these AD facilities will get more and more growth. The 2026 mandate for commercial food will pump about 100, maybe 200,000 tonnes into the market. That's the stimulus that some of the AD guys need to get going. But in terms of converting to FOGO scale, there will be nothing ready for you for 2030, in my view. But that's why I asked the question about sieving FOGO into an AD component and a woody waste component, whether that was feasible from an economic point of view, because that's another iteration we could go to. But don't hold your breath. You're not going to have an AD option, in my view, in 2030. You might have it sometime during your 7-year contract, but certainly you'll have it at the other end of your 7-year contract. So, yeah, I think that's probably a consensus view of the world.
Yeah, possibly. Yep.
Presuming that your digestate regulations are resolved.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Without digestate regulations, nothing will happen. Yep, please. Yep.
Hey guys, I'm Nick from Agile Bioenergy. I recommend that we are the only representative from the energy retailer in this conference. I just want to share a couple of the experience and challenges that we had for this, something that you call that doing the suicide and manufacturing all those anaerobic digestion processes in manufacturing in Australia. We have a couple of the cal-based anaerobic lagoons, and if we are thinking to importing all technology from the European, but if you consider that all of those HA assessment that we need to do for all of those facilities that's import from the Europe to the Australia, it's going to add the expenses to your OPEX and CAPEX, and it's going to make it crazy and is not feasible for doing the AD anaerobic digestion based on some specific size of the feedstock. And another challenge is that securing that feedstock under the long-term contracts and also with the fixed composition in your feedstock. Because for the anaerobic digestion processes, if you couldn't secure that fixed composition of your feedstock, is not going to have an as efficiency that you expect at the end of the process. We don't want to invent the world, but we are seeking to some feasible models that have some commercial and standard size of the anaerobic digestion, microscale. I'm talking about to have an integration with other kind of the renewable energy resources to make that it's feasible, because despite Europe, there is no subside for injecting the biomethane to the network. And purification of the raw biogas to the biomethane and desulfurization and all of these treatment, they are super expensive. And it's make it the feasibility study for those stuff is super expensive. I saw that a couple of the numbers that you bring in your presentation for the comparing the feasibility and comparing the biomethane with other kind of energy, but the whole of them was about the biomethane. And treating the biogas, raw biogas to the biomethane is not feasible at the right moment. We have a Malabar project, yes, but there is no capability on the biogas, on the gas network for injecting the biomethane. There is no even the mature market for the digestion that is making this that is going to add more challenges to this area. But I share all of those challenges to have your point of view. I reckon that instead of copying and following the European policy, we need to have our own approach in Australia, because there is some significant difference between the Europe and the Australia in terms of all of those regulation, all of those market, and all of those definition. And I reckon that, as you say, 2030 is approaching, and we don't have even just one big facility for the AD. The Yarra Valley Water, they had an AD facility in the Lily, but they are still have challenging for securing the long-term contract for the feedstock. You know, but that's the reason. I will, if you have your idea on that.
So I'll take that, most of it as a statement and part of it as a question. And in trying to answer your question, I'd say, so if I heard you correctly, you're asking, should we follow Europe or should we make our own policy? Because, yeah. So if I get $100 for each time I took an Australian to Europe, having seen what works and what works well, then coming back and then say, I ain't gonna work here because we are so different, I'd have to deposit for a house in Sydney by now, right? And my answer to that is, I disagree with you, to be polite. And the reason is a number of issues, or the couple of reasons. The first reason is, if you would wait for an Australian policy about anaerobic digestion or anything else to come about, you would not only have grey hair, you would have probably no hair left on your head. The second thing is, I said that already in my presentation, injection of biomethane into the grid ain't gonna happen in Australia because it's not gonna work, right? So in that case, you don't compare, or Australia doesn't compare, but that's part of the business case, right? When you look at, do I have a business case for anaerobic digestion, you look at, what do I do with my output, right? And then you see injection into the gas grid doesn't work because our gas grid doesn't work. It works differently to Europe, and we can't use their experience. But that doesn't mean we can't use the biogas. The Jandakot facility has got one CHP. They're now buying a second CHP. They're using the CO2 to run their glass houses where they grow blueberries, and they use the energy on site to run their composting facility. If you say, couldn't quite hear what you said about being super expensive, but to strip out the CO2 and upgrade the biogas to biomethane is an established process. You will get fixed quotes for that process, right? It's engineering-wise no big deal, but you need to make sure it makes commercial sense for you. It makes what's the biggest value of that output for you. As I said, if you can replace electricity or energy at a retail cost, that makes a lot of sense. If you are dependent on making electricity and feed that into the grid at the wholesale price, it makes no sense. If you can use the biogas to upgrade to biomethane to replace diesel for whatever purpose, it may make a lot of sense, but you have to do your business case. So I think you got to be switched on about these things. I wouldn't be all doom and gloom, and I wouldn't rely on Australian policy because it ain't going to happen. Never.
Also in the AGL team, from a commercial perspective, not technical at all, so please excuse my ignorance on that. No. We've been looking at developing projects over the last 12 months, and we've made some inroads in securing feedstocks. We've got a project that is looking at potentially injecting biomethane into the grid. So we've located the project location right next to a potential injection point, and we're talking to the utility through this process, similar to Gemini, but it's not Gemini, but we're using their experience with the Malabar project. But it's becoming very apparent that an AGL can't do the whole process. All stakeholders have to line up. And from your experience in Ramondas, for example, you know, we're speaking to various different waste management companies, and they will not commit to long-term feedstock supply, which is a problem. For us to go back to our AGL board and say, right, we need X amount of money.
Yep.
They say, right, have you secured this? No. Well, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, how can we incentivize waste management companies efficiently, enough to be able to, you know, give us this long-term contract? Because at the end of the day, it's in their best interest to have a solution that is, you know, decarbonising their clients and so on. So our challenge is, let's get these long-term contracts, 15, 20 years. We'll fund the project. There's no issues there.
Yeah.
But we need the commercial outcome on the other end.
Yeah, got it. So my quick answer to you is you're partly barking up the wrong tree. The longer portion of that answer is the waste companies are collectors. They're not generators of waste, right? In the waste collection game, you typically don't get long-term contracts, especially not for commercial food waste, right? There's no culture in Australia to give someone a 5, 10, 15-year contract to collect their waste from a food processing facility. It doesn't exist. The idea doesn't even exist. If you are a council, it's a different story, because they're looking for long-term safety in their pricing structure, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to go to the generators of the waste and say, give us all your waste, and then the collector becomes a mercenary, right? That could work. No, well, that's not true. Councils can give you 10 years contract, of course they can. No, that's not true. That's not true. Let's talk into the microphone, because people.
This will be our last one or two, I think. Frank.
Yeah, that's right. We need to stop.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the other thing that needs to be recognised is that the FOGO mandate also is about food waste mandate from commercial food.
Yeah.
So, you know, that is going to drive significant tonnes out of the likes of Woolworths, Coles. Now, they may be, as Frank said, they've been used to the fact that the waste industry has been happy to sort of pick it up and take it, and whoever got it on their truck owned the waste. That market, I would suggest, is changing.
Yeah, I agree.
Because extended producer responsibility, whether it's a manufacturer or it's a retailer, is going to drive a different outcome.
Yeah. I guess if you allow me to say that, you need good advice, and good advice is expensive. And secondly, you are the victim of being the first, right? And that is the problem in every society, in everywhere. But good luck and keep going. And look, it's 1 o'clock, so thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's time for lunch, and we just wrap up and